O'Callaghan was retained, however, and 20 years later, on the 1st of July 1902, actually became the Chief Commissioner, succeeding Cholmondeley. That's not to say, of course, that O'Callaghan was a reformed character. His period of tenure of the top position was troubled by a range of accusations regarding his conduct, but that's a story for another time. The second long-term impact of the Kelly outbreak was the gathering of the detective branch more fully into Victoria Police. From its beginnings, the detectives had been an essentially independent group, headed by a superintendent of police who was answerable to the Chief Commissioner of Police, but operating independently. It was possible, for example, for individuals to join the detective branch without previously having any policing experience. The detective force in Victoria was formed in 1844, making it the oldest such group in the world. Prior to its incorporation into the force in 1883, it was itself the subject of a number of investigations into its methods and efficiencies. This is perhaps not too surprising when one considers that the methods employed by the detectives often brought them into close contact with the criminal elements of society, and temptations to benefit from this contact were great. As the saying goes, if you run with foxes, you begin to smell like foxes. That was certainly how the Longmore Royal Commission saw it. The Commissioner's report described the Detective Department as a nursery of crime. This was attributed by the Commission as a result largely of the appointment of Inspector Frederick Secretan to take charge of the detective branch. The Commission also felt that the reliance of detectives on paid informers, known as fizgigs, was manifestly un-English and contrary to every principle of fair play. The merging of the detective branch with the general force led eventually and inevitably to the creation of the Criminal Investigation Branch, a part of Victoria Police that has endured to the present day. Perhaps the most interesting outcome from the hunt for the Kelly Gang was the creation of a corps of Aboriginal police trackers in Victoria. Although one of the recommendations of the Royal Commission, in fact, even before the Kelly Gang was destroyed at Glenrowan in July 1880, the Chief Commissioner of Police had come to the conclusion that a group of Aboriginal men on hand for tracking purposes would be a useful thing. In October 1878, following the killing of 3 policemen at Stringybark, the Queensland Government offered the use of a team of Aboriginal trackers to assist in the capture of the outlaws. Chief Commissioner Standish declined the offer, preferring to capture the gang in his own way. However, after the Kelly Gang's audacious and successful raid on the town of Jerilderie 3 months later, on 8 February 1879, even Standish had to bow to government pressure and ask for the assistance he had previously declined. It was widely believed, with justification, that Ned Kelly was in awe of the Aboriginal ability to follow a track through the most difficult terrain. If this was so, the police should have seized the initiative. But after the trackers arrived, the officers in charge allowed other imperatives to intrude, and opportunities to press home an advantage were wasted through internal politicking. In the event, the use of the Queensland troopers produced mixed results. But their presence clearly impressed some Victoria Police officers. The Chief Commissioner of Police Standish asked that the Queensland Government allow the 5 trackers to stay on in Victoria without Stanhope O'Connor, the Queensland officer who had accompanied them. But this request was denied. So in June 1880, Superintendent Cholmondeley, the same who subsequently became Chief Commissioner, was dispatched into New South Wales to find 5 Aborigines for service in Victoria. Cholmondeley had no luck in New South Wales, so he went on to Queensland, where, with the assistance of Queensland Police at Maryborough, he was able to recruit 5 men from the Methodist-run Aboriginal Reserve on nearby Fraser Island. These 5 men, referred to as boys by Cholmondeley in a telegram, were to be the first in a long line of Queenslanders numbering about 90 men over a period of 88 years, who made the trip south to work for the police in Victoria. What Thomley had done was set in place a process which endured without major modification until 1968. Initially, all of the trackers were stationed together in Benalla, where it was felt the greatest need existed. Within a couple of years, however, the group was split into two, and while 3 remained in the northeast, 2 of the trackers were stationed at the stud depot on Dandenong Creek, in the area now referred to as the police paddocks. For the 88 years Aboriginal trackers were employed by the force, the men worked in all parts of the state. Their skills were used for tracing lost children, for following the track of suspects away from crime scenes, and on one occasion following the route taken by night soil carts. They probably used their sense of smell rather than their sight on that job. Part of the reason the trackers were stationed at the stud depot was that they were used also to assist with the training of horses for the mounted branch. When attempts were made to introduce dogs for tracking work, it was the trackers, the Aboriginal trackers, who assisted with the handling of the dogs. Over the years, through a variety of causes, the scheme was wound down. By 1904, the permanent tracking presence in the northeast was terminated altogether, and from that date there was never more than 2 trackers at a time stationed in Victoria. From the end of the Second World War, this number was further reduced to a single tracker. This diminishment was partly due to a change in Victoria's population, which brought a change in the types and locations of crime. With population moving to the cities, there was less cattle stealing, less incendiarism, and fewer lost people. At the same time, urban environments were not conducive to exercising tracking skills. From the 1930s onwards, there was also less and less need for horses by Victoria Police. Firstly, bicycles, then motorcycles and cars were introduced. There was thus also less need for men to assist in the training of horses, a role that had been central to the presence of the Queenslanders. Over the years, there was also a change in the length of time the trackers were spending in Victoria. At the beginning of the scheme, in 1880, the 5 men were hired on 12 months contracts. At the end of that time, those men were taken back to their home colony, and another 5 hired as replacements. From the early part of the 20th century, it seemed to be harder to recruit men for the job, although fewer were required. So those men who did come to Victoria were encouraged to stay longer. From 1945 until the end of the scheme in 1968, only 5 trackers came from Queensland to serve with Victoria Police. The last tracker to do duty with the force was Victor Shepherd, who had been here for 6 years when he returned to Queensland in March 1968. Change is endemic to any organisation, as it is for the human condition generally. History is about documenting and explaining that change, and the primary way in which historians do this is by telling stories. The whole saga of the Kelly outbreak no doubt contains a wide range of interesting stories, many of which involve the police. In focusing our stories on the police rather than the criminals, we can learn much about Victoria Police as an organisation, particularly about the ways in which it has changed. Thank you very much.